as we rounded the corner going past the Carillon, and then you drive between the Carillon and the conservatory, he said, "Stop the car." So we stopped the two cars. We were in tandem. And he got out, and he's this tall Dutchman, and he raised his arms to the sky, and he said, This is where my garden should go.
That's Maura Campbell, one of the founders of the volunteer group Oudolf Garden Detroit. They broke ground today on what will become the Piet Oudolf Garden, a 2.5-acre attraction on Detroit's Belle Isle.
Welcome to your Daily Detroit, recorded on Tuesday, June 11th, 2019. I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. Today's interview edition is with Maura and her husband, Duncan Campbell. We talk all about what's coming from the legendary landscape architect Piet Oudolf, who's perhaps best known for his work on New York City's wildly popular High Line and Chicago's Lurie Garden.
I'm excited about this conversation, Sven, but we have to take care of some business first. So here's the deal. Are you looking for a job? Got a friend who is? Well, I have a thing for you to go to next week, so take some notes. Tuesday, June 18th. It's like a happy hour from 4 to 7 p.m. It's a job fair as part of Startup Weekend at a place called the Ultimetric Collider at 1500 Woodward.
Oh yeah, Ultimetric Collider. I saw that episode of Star Trek, I think.
Trust me, man, it's a real thing and exists on Woodward Avenue. And you, thanks to our sponsor, Repurpose, can meet with some companies looking to hire people like you. Think Domino's, Pillar, Red Ventures, Clink, Integral, and more. They're all hiring. And the thing is, this event is totally free. There will be drinks, music, and you can make connections to find your next job.
And it's free.
We'll have a link to the Detroit Startup Weekend Career Fair in the show notes. And of course, you can always visit repurpose.co.
Now to Belle Isle. Maura and Duncan Campbell are with us in the studio from the Oudolf Garden Detroit organization. Maura and Duncan, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so you got the ground broken today, key step in the process. For people who aren't familiar with the plans over there and with Piet Oudolf, I mean, who is this Dutch guy with this, kind of unusual name? Why is he such a big deal? Why should we be excited about this?
Well, Detroit has managed to attract arguably the best public garden designer in the world to come here and do one of his garden designs. And we are the envy of so many other places because of that. It started with a love letter from the Garden Club of Michigan, and we mailed it to his home in Hummelo in the Netherlands, and he answered. And so we say what started as a love letter from Detroit has become a love affair with Detroit because he loves Detroit.
Really? Are you a member of this Garden Club of Michigan?
I am.
Yeah.
And so when I was president of the Garden Club, we were really trying to become more engaged again with Detroit. We had had a lot of history with Detroit in our history. The club goes back to 1911, and we had a long history on Belle Isle at different times. And so we really wanted to do a meaningful project on Belle Isle. But, Jer knows me from my past, let's vision this thing out. And so when we asked people to dream big, and if you could have anybody in the world, who would it be? And Gene Hudson, who's a member of our club, called me and said, Maura, I can't get it out of my head that the perfect person for Detroit and for Belle Isle at this time in our history is Piet Oudolf. Mm-hmm. And I said, could you spell it for me? And then I had the same thing. Like when she said the High Line and the Lurie Garden and some of his others, I'm like, oh, okay, got it. And he was by far everyone's favorite. So then it was, how do we get him?
Yeah.
And so, we were lucky that we didn't narrow our vision and we went for it. And luckily, he felt the same way about Detroit that we felt about him.
So did he reply right away? And when you wrote him initially, did you specifically pitch Belle Isle for this project? Okay.
Yeah, so we had already decided as a club that because of our history and interest and because it's such a connector for so many people, it was a great opportunity, right? And we had already talked to the DNR to start, what would it take and could we get permission if we were willing to do all the work for something? And so we'd gone through about 9 months of people saying, I know someone who knows Piet, and we didn't get very far. So finally we knew his address in the Netherlands in Hummelo, and we wrote an old-fashioned letter and we put it in the mail, and I made Duncan weigh it a few different times to make sure we had enough postage. And we sent it right after Thanksgiving 2016, and then between Christmas and New Year's of 2016, he wrote back to Jean first. Like, her email was first, and so he sent her a note, and he said he was interested in learning more and maybe coming to Detroit to consider a project.
And he eventually did come to Detroit, right?
He did. We started phone calls in January of 2017. And Duncan, what was it, about 3 weeks before?
So we had 3 weeks notice in the end of March that he was
Right.
coming in April. And he was coming in from Chicago, obviously has the Lurie Garden there. And so we all picked him up at the airport, and we took him everywhere in Detroit. We wanted him to really understand Detroit. So the first exit we got off on the highway was Michigan Avenue, but not by the train station, West Michigan. So we went through West Detroit. We went through Corktown. We showed him the Heidelberg Project. We showed the depopulated side of Detroit on the east side. We took him to Midtown, took him to downtown, took him to New Center. And so what he really did is he really enjoyed the vibrancy of Detroit and the activity going on in Detroit. And he really saw the character of what was going on. And then we showed him around Belle Isle. And he's the one who selected the site in front of the Nancy Brown Peace Carillon. And it's a connecting site. It brings the Remick Bandshell in together with the Whitcomb Conservatory. So it's really a masterful selection there.
Yeah. And describe for listeners who may not be familiar where exactly on the island this is. I mean, you mentioned a couple of the local, but it's near the riverfront, kind of.
Yeah, so it's in what they call the cultural district, and the
I was unaware that there was a cultural district to Belle Isle.
Yes, they call that the cultural district.
So if you think of the aquarium, which is attached to the Whitcomb Conservatory, which is the glass and
The big
steel
greenhouse,
building,
yep.
the big greenhouse. If you go south or southwest toward downtown across the street, you have a limestone bell tower, a carillon. And it is right in front of the bell tower, and it's embracing the bell tower, and it's about 2.5 acre garden, which is a big garden. And the beds account for about 1.5 acres out of that, with walkways and grassways and crushed granite and mounded beds.
2.5 acres. I know you guys there's a bunch of really big numbers about like all the plants and everything going into this garden. Can you give us a little rundown on some of that?
Sure.
I'm sure you have it committed to memory, right?
Right, we do actually. So the thing that distinguishes Piet's gardens is he designs for year-round enjoyment. So they're gardens for all seasons. He thinks as much about the structure and the sculptural outlines of gardens and plants in the winter, so they're still beautiful even when they're not in bloom and it's in the winter.
Right, and so he doesn't cut these stalks down once the frost comes and things turn brown.
No, he keeps things up so that they are beautiful and you can go into the garden and enjoy it in the winter. They take less maintenance than traditional gardens because the plants are so planted so closely together. So for this garden in September, we're putting in 18,000 plants. He uses a combination of natives and hardy perennials. He's tested his palette all over the world. His favorite plants in the world come from this part of the world. He loves a lot of the natives of Michigan and the Midwest. And so we have found 9 of the growers who are growing the plants already that are going to go in September are from Michigan, including 2 from Detroit.
That's cool.
And so between 85 and 90% of all the plants in the garden are going to come right from Michigan. And the growers are telling us across the state that they're going to have markets they never had before because people are going to see their plants in this garden and they're going to want those plants in their own gardens or in their own neighborhoods. So it's exciting.
Yeah, that is.
So it's really more like a garden raising because there's so many plants that have to go in, and his designs are so intricate that you really have to have professionals who've done these kinds of gardens before help you at the center. And then there'll be lots of rules for various volunteers. But it's going to be quite something putting this garden into the ground in September.
And a lot of money involved in this in terms of what this costs, right? And talk about that and how that's being paid for.
There are 3 phases to the project. One was the design phase, which was under the Garden Club of Michigan. That was about a $200,000 phase. Then there's a construction phase, which is about $2 million, which is under the Belle Isle Conservancy as our 501c3. Then there's
construction, meaning the planting, installation.
Yep, breaking the ground, and we can talk about the big process on the ground. And then during the maintenance phase or the endowment phase is through the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan. And so it's sort of $200,000, $2 million, $2 million. So it's about a $4.2 million project. We have about $250,000 still to raise for that total number. And we've raised about $3.6, $3.7 million in the last 12 months for this particular project, as we've been fundraising for the endowment as well as for the installation at the same time.
We had to go through a public approval process, and we were actually asked to pilot it because, remember, everything was happening at once, right? The DNR had just taken over running the island as a state park. You have other groups that had a lot of history on Belle Isle. And so we were really the first new thing, and they asked us if we would be willing to kind of go through a process that wasn't fully baked yet. And we did that. So we did 2 public hearings, public input sessions. We actually had a Skype video with Piet that we played the video where he answered a lot of the questions that had been raised by different people. And then the deal with the DNR is we said if we raise the money and do the work for the design, install, and maintain phases of the garden, will you give us the permission through a memo of agreement that we can do this garden? And that's what we had to do. So we had quite a few different I's to dot and T's to cross in order to get this garden to go today.
Yeah. So you were talking about the garden before, and how Oudolf likes to use native plants and hardy perennials and everything. He also likes to evoke a sense of place and say something about the setting. So the High Line is this, for people who don't know, it's he used an elevated subway platform, subway tracks, train tracks, and landscaped it, and it's this lush, incredible oasis with lots of places to hang out and interpretive kiosks that are literally floating above the busy city streets. And then in Chicago, the Lurie Gardens in Millennium Park is meant to evoke like a blooming prairie, right? Like kind of hearkening to Illinois' Great Plains and everything. How does he intend to do that on Belle Isle? What's going to be sort of Detroity about it?
Well, he has told us that it is the most natural location for one of his public gardens of any garden he's done in the entire world. So just 2 distinctions. In New York, both for Battery Park and the High Line, he was the plant designer, the garden designer, but he wasn't the big contractor.
Right.
So he was brought in as a subcontractor. Same thing with the Lurie Garden in Chicago. We are the very first time in the United States where we've actually assembled the team around him as the master architect or designer from the get-go. So what's different is we're actually following the European model for some of his gardens. So I think he very much saw that by, our friend Richard called it the hole in the donut. Like you go around the island and all of a sudden you do look at this big grassy area and you're thinking, well, there's nothing here, but it could be so much more. And I think he saw connecting those cultural icons that are already there, but they need more love. So he saw the mid-century bandshell. He's actually gotten up on the stage of it. He saw the bell tower, obviously, because it has that verticality and it gives a focus to the garden. You have the Peace Carillon, but opposite of it, you have a lower monument, which is the peace monument between Canada and the United States. So he liked, I think, the history because he asks how is a space used, who's going to use it. And he told us that he likes to build gardens that bring people in and connect people, not that keep people out. So that's always part of what he's trying to do. He wants to create a space that brings people together and in. And I think he just loved how this particular spot did all of those things.
Right. And I can't remember if you mentioned it, but it's worth pointing out that he picked this site on Belle Isle, right? Like you offered up Belle Isle, but he picked the actual site, correct?
So there's we actually did more than that. When he said yes to coming to Detroit, we thought, oh my gosh, if you've got the world's best, do you tell him where he should put his garden? Or should you show him lots of options and have him tell you? And we decided on the latter. We decided that, you know what? We should have Piet tell us where the best site is. And that's funny because the very first lunch we had the head of the DNR. He has since retired, but Keith Cray at the table. And he said, "So Maura, what's the plan?" And I said, "Well, we thought we had a spot that we wanted to show him, but he's the best. So we're going to ask him where his garden should go." He goes, "Well, that's great for you, but I didn't make that decision." So he looked right at Pete and said, "Pete, we want you on Belle Isle." And I said, "Well, I'm quoting you for the next several years as we do this." And he goes, "I expect you to."
Yeah.
And then the next day, after we had showed him the riverfront and the DeQuinder Cut and several other things, he asked Duncan if we had enough time to go back to Belle Isle. And as we rounded the corner going past the Carillon, and then you drive between the Carillon and the conservatory, he said, "Stop the car." So we stopped the two cars. We were in tandem. And he got out, and he's this tall Dutchman, and he raised his arms to the sky, and he said, This is where my garden should go. And we all went, and tried to capture it, on video and pictures and everything. But that was the spot he picked, and we were there for the moment when he picked it.
And he's a connector also. So he's connecting the Remick Bandshell with the Whitcomb Conservatory and the Dawson, the picnic area. So he saw the void that he could fill with this curvilinear, impressionist-type garden. Think of a painterly pointillism type painting where these clumps of these different colors and sizes and flowers closely cropped together, et cetera, as you're walking through curvilinear longitudinal beds on grass and crushed granite, and you're basically immersed within the garden. And the focal point is that Peace Carillon in front of you. And so these beds are longitudinal going down to the water, et cetera. And there are a number of them with different planting motifs going on.
And he's pushing himself. So he is blending some of his most iconic styles of design, but we've also added two other components that are not part of a lot of his gardens. The Herb Foundation said they would support the garden if we could figure out a way to do something with stormwater and also if we could do something with wetlands. And this particular site lent itself to both things. Not the stormwater so much, but what we're able to do with the stormwater garden is we're actually able to mitigate or handle stormwater off of the hard surfaces adjacent to the garden. And then the same thing with the wetlands garden. And what's really going to be phenomenal for Detroit is it's replicable. So the idea is to do this so people see that these can be beautiful gardens, that they can evoke kind of that style of Pete while doing something really good for the environment and something sustainable that actually solves a problem.
One of the things I love about this is that it's accessible. It's a world-class attraction that's accessible to all Detroiters. And I think that's really powerful. And I also think that's very unique. And I don't think we should set that aside. I think we need to make sure we highlight that. Because, that's really mind-blowing if we talk about all the threads around Detroit and can people be a part of it? Everybody can be a part of a garden.
Yeah, there's not going to be a ticket booth where you got to pay to get in or anything.
No, the only entrance fee, if you will, is if you're driving onto the island and they happen to have people in the security booths. If you got a state park pass, you're fine. But if you bike on, if you walk on, if you take a bus or a shuttle on, there is no entrance fee, and there will be absolutely no admission fee to the garden. So once you're on Belle Isle, please come to the garden. And Jeremiah, you raised such a great point. One of the things that we've been so heartwarmed by is every time we go to talk to people, we ask for, do you have a Belle Isle story? Why is Belle Isle important to you? And we recently met with the new lieutenant governor, and he is so excited about this garden. And he told us his Belle Isle story. So evidently, what did he say, Duncan? For the first 7 years of his life?
You're talking about Garland Gilchrist.
Yes, Garland Gilchrist, the lieutenant governor. He said that his grandfather would take them once a week for a day at Belle Isle. And he loved that day. They would go in the conversion van that his grandfather had. And he did everything on Belle Isle. He's got all these memories of that. And he is so excited to come and be a part of this garden. At the same time, one of our fellow grounds crew members is Lorna Thomas, Buzz Thomas's mother. And
former state senator. And
you got it. And she's a very involved person in all things Detroit. And she told her story about Belle Isle. And evidently, she grew up on the east side. And every week, she would ride her bike to Belle Isle to listen to the DSO its concert series. at the band shell. And she said that is what spawned her love of classical and orchestral music. She just loved it. So that happens with everybody. You talk to all sorts of people and you find out that they've got a Belle Isle story. And that's what Piet wants. He wants a garden that you can come on a bike, you can walk in, you can be in a wheelchair, you can be rolling a stroller through, and everybody can come and enjoy this garden.
Well, one of the other things I think that's so great about this is that Belle Isle for so long has, the island is full of mature, beautiful trees and everything, but I'm not aware of any like new efforts to like plant new things. I mean, there have probably been some small tree planting efforts here and there, but like this is a major investment for a park that it's been a while since it's seen one, I think.
They've had to put so much money in fixing things that needed to be fixed. A lot of things that are infrastructure that people don't even see what they're doing, or fixing buildings that need mending or they're going to fall down and not be usable. So our real hope is that, yes, it's a brand new
It's a piece of art.
And a piece of art.
It's a piece of art that you walk through.
Right. Well, and you also used the term earlier, green halo effect. Like, explain that.
Well, I've told you, we've got some exciting projects all through Detroit, but I tell people that this one's going to have the best green return on investment because compared to the money that's going to go into the wonderful West Riverfront Park, ours is much smaller. And yet I think it's going to have a huge outsized effect. So you were talking about Lurie. We know that Lurie Garden gets about 10 million visitors a year because Millennium Park gets 20 million, and half of them go to the garden. And they're now touting the High Line. Its numbers just keep going up in terms of being one of the major tourist attractions in New York City. So people have told us that there will be people who will travel to Detroit simply to go to this garden. So we think you're going to see lots more traffic, and we think that's a good thing, especially if we can figure out how to get people there without necessarily driving and parking a car on Belle Isle. So, but the main thing is we need to get the garden built and start helping people get to enjoy it.
Installation starts, the planting of everything starts in September. What's going on between now and then? And are you guys still looking for volunteer help, et cetera?
We're always looking for volunteer help, and we're continuing to fundraise because we haven't hit our goal yet. Over the summer, so Anglin Civil is our earthwork contractor with United Lawnscape to get the space ready. And one of the big challenges that we had is that we had a pH level that was 8, which is very alkaline. That's not good for plants. And so what we're having to do on the site is we're having to take off 1 foot to 2 feet down to the clay soil. We're then laying down fabric, laying down 6 inches of granite gravel, neutral gravel, and drainage conduits. And then we're having to take the soil that we took off the site that we're reusing and enriching with 20% sand and 20% pine bark, and then layering it back on the site, 6 inches layers on the site as it goes up so that it has the proper pH level. It's sort of like a container garden there.
Wow.
And so all the major earthwork will be done this summer, and then we start planting about the 19th of September. That's when the first 18,000 plants go in. And in September, and then in June of 2020, another 18,000 plants go in. So it's about 36,000 plants in round numbers. And we have over 113 different varieties right now. We'll be adding some more as we finish out the rain garden as far as the plant selection. So it's a very ambitious project. We have over 500 volunteers signed up, approaching 600, et cetera. And this is going to be an all-volunteer effort to install the garden.
Wow, very cool. And does the garden have an official name? Is it just going to be known as the Oudolf Garden Detroit?
To be determined. We've just been calling it Oudolf Garden Detroit. And we did that on purpose, too, because we wanted to keep the door open if Piet felt so moved to do more than one garden in Detroit. So we wanted, to link those two identities. Even though his first one is on the site he picked on Belle Isle. The other thing that we've learned is there's such a demand to learn about his style of gardening and the fact that it could have make such a huge difference in community gardens, home gardens, et cetera, throughout the region. So we are also looking to see how we can bring the learning and educate people on how to take what he does and bring it into neighborhoods. The other thing that we've had is huge support from the University of Michigan. A couple of professors there big supporters from the get-go, including Mary Carroll Hunter, who right now has 14 graduate students in landscape architecture who are taking a practicum course for this garden, and they're going to be helping us install it.
Very cool. If listeners out there want to get involved, where should they go or call or what do they do?
Go to Oudolf Garden Detroit.org, and you can sign up as a volunteer. You can make a donation online. And right now we're having a plant for support of the endowment of the garden, that you can select a variety, select the number that you'd like of that variety, and make a contribution of a plant that appeals to you that mean something special, and also leave a tribute to someone along the way. And that all can be done online at OudolfGardenDetroit.org.
Maura and Duncan Campbell, thanks so much for coming by and telling us about it. We look forward to reconnecting with you when this is closer to reality.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
That'll do it for today's show. Before we let you go, we'd like to take a moment to thank our latest Patreon member and longtime friend of Daily Detroit, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. If you'd like to be like Dave, and frankly, who wouldn't, then head over to patreon.com/dailydetroit. It's a great way to help support this project and keep pushing Detroit's conversation forward. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.
You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.